Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. I'm Gene Parunak. Today is our 23rd episode. It's Friday, August 28th, and I'm excited to be with you. We've got one news item we want to tell you about today. I am joined by Scott Hiipakka of the Michigan-Israel Business Accelerator, who is going to tell us about an event that is starting on August 31st of this year about innovation versus Corona in the state of Michigan. And I want to welcome Scott live with us for just a minute to tell us about this event that is coming up. Scott, it's good to have you here.
Thanks, Gene, for having me. And I hope you can see and hear me okay.
We
And
can.
yeah, perfect. And I'm going to share my screen just to give folks a sense as to what we have coming up. And hopefully you have the main screen there. So for your guests, we'd like to invite them to attend Innovation versus Corona. It's a webinar on Monday at 8:30 in the morning. It'll last an hour and 15 minutes. We're really excited about what this represents as we consider really what COVID has done to our state, and as we think about what it's going to take to move Michigan forward. Through a series of conversations that I've had with multiple business leaders from across the state, we've identified what we feel is a pretty strong need, and that need was not necessarily being addressed. And so it's how do Michigan businesses not just address the short-term response of what we're seeing with COVID. Gene, this is bigger than hand sanitizer, face shields, and plexiglass. When you consider the impact of how do we look beyond to 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and capturing lessons learned, but also really leveraging those and thinking about how do we create a stronger Michigan by bringing together business leaders and as well as other partners, both public and private sector, to really position Michigan to compete and succeed, and kind of taking a page actually out of the Israeli handbook. Again, my organization is a nonprofit dedicated to economic development between Michigan and Israel. And so if you're familiar with Israel, the country has really, just to survive, has had to innovate. And so Michigan, we're in a unique position right now, as is the rest of the world. Without adaptation, we'll have a hard time really turning our economy around. So the solution that we're bringing on Monday the 31st is bringing together business leaders across multiple industry segments. And think of Monday as a kickoff meeting for a broader opportunity to really bring together folks to talk about where we've been and the impact of COVID, and then where are we going tomorrow? And then what does that look like? And how can we leverage innovation to take us there? We've got a pretty strong lineup of speakers. I've got the CEOs of Spectrum Health and Henry Ford Health System, who are going to kick us off first thing with kind of where we've been with COVID. We've got an economist, as well as an individual who leads the tech transfer program from the University of Michigan. So two individuals from U of M are going to talk about the impact on our economy and on our startup ecosystem. And then we're going to bring in a speaker from Israel to talk about how innovation can support restarting Michigan's economy. And then we're going to have a panel of really how we're going to move Michigan forward together in a COVID world. And then we'll set the table for the next steps, which are these working groups that will be convened, statewide working groups with business leaders, like folks like you and others in this community here in the med health field and life sciences. We're excited to invite your listeners to participate if they want to. Gene, what I can do is I'll make sure. Well, as a matter of fact, we actually already have the link. I think we sent that to you. If you want to offer that up to your guests, I'll let you do that.
What you can do also, Scott, is you can even live here, you can type that into the chat box. Just make sure it goes to all panelists and all attendees. They'll all get it directly. And maybe you can either just pop it up on the screen really quick or mention it really quick for those who are listening later on a recording. How do people get involved and get connected?
So sure. So they can go to www.michiganisrael.com. And that's our website. Again, michiganisrael.com. If you scroll down on our homepage, there's an events. You can go right to the events page, and then that'll take you to the registration site. Again, www.michiganisrael.com. You can register. there, and then we hope you can join us on Monday the 31st at 8:30 in the morning.
That is great, Scott. We appreciate your popping on here to tell us about that. If you need a good excuse to get up Monday morning and get started on something worthwhile, there you go right there. So I hope that people will get involved and reach out. We're so excited all of these different things that people across the state and around the world really are doing to try to bring people together. So I appreciate you telling us about that, Scott. You and I were just chatting beforehand, and I believe I hope I get this right. You were mobilized with the National Guard in Michigan during Corona, and we're gonna have to bring you back on at some time and tell us all about that, because we're interested to know what happened about that. But appreciate today this update.
Thanks, Gene, for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Oh, actually, you know what? We do have one, Scott. Before I completely lose you, we do have a question here. How long is the workshop on Monday? It looked like it was an hour and 15 minutes. Is that right, from Tony?
That is correct. It's an hour and 15 minutes on Monday, 8:30 to 9:45, and we're going to move fast. We have a jam-packed audience or speaker panel, so it's going to be pretty quick, but we're excited about the speakers we have.
That's great. And Jeff Reinfeldt also stuck a link into the chat to all panelists and all attendees. There's an Eventbrite link for the tickets for that, so you can get to it that way as well. Great. Once again, Scott, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Happy Friday,
Appreciate
everybody.
Happy Friday. That is wonderful. Love it when people get together for a good cause. Next up, I want to welcome Tom Evans with BioSense onto the show. Tom is a former emergency medical technician who saw a problem with electrocardiograms, ECGs. Remember those stickers that we like to stick all over people, and most of us don't know why they're there, but they're there, and we see them and we think, wow, there's MedTech. Tom and his team are working on non-contact ECG. And so we wanted to have Tom come on today and first of all, educate us about what is each ECG, why does it matter, what are the problems with it, and Tom, in your time as a emergency medical tech, what did you see when you were a user of this? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Should I share my screen right now, or?
Yeah, go ahead and share it. We'd love to know more about you and about electrocardiograms in general.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. As Gene was saying, my background, I was studying biomedical engineering in school about 9 years ago. When I graduated, I also worked as an EMT on the ambulances in Milwaukee's inner city. I did that for about 5 years. And in doing that, I saw a lot of the issues with the way that we were applying the EKG technology in the field. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the EKG, basically what we do is we take these stickers that you can see on the right-hand side and we place them on your skin in different locations across your body to measure the electrical signals of the heart. And you can see in this waveform in the middle, you get a morphology of a waveform that actually is used by us to tell if someone's actually having a heart attack. Do they have arrhythmias? Are the medications that we're providing them affecting their heart in a certain way? So it's a very important piece of knowledge for us as emergency personnel. They use these ECGs throughout the hospital. It's the most important data that you can get off of a person for understanding what their condition is. We would throw these on patients if they were nauseous, if they were weak, all these signs and symptoms of heart conditions. Even back pain in females was a condition that presented mostly in females than in males, but we would throw this on them as well. And so this data that we're looking at has over 480 different biomarkers. In the picture in the middle, you can see that we've identified some of the key biomarkers, but there's many more. And as you can imagine, using AI and machine learning, you can come up with even more data points to look at for outputs and so on. So today I'm going to talk about the problems that I faced, and then touch on the solution that we've came up with as a business, and looking forward to sharing that with you today. So some of the problems that I faced when I was working as an EMT, when we had an actual heart attack patient, they would be sweaty, what they call diaphoretic, which is really wet and sweaty, cool and clammy. And when we would apply these sticky pads that you see on the right-hand side to the skin, they wouldn't stick. They would just fall right off. And so that was a big headache for us trying to assess a patient where time is muscle for getting drugs on board for an individual that's having a heart attack. And we had to understand what was actually going on so that we could assess and then provide the right treatment. And when these electrodes would constantly just fall off, it was time consuming. So it would take a while to apply these ECGs, especially in the field. With females in public, we'd have to make a decision as first responders whether we'd remove that female's shirt and apply these sticky pads directly to their chest, exposing them to the public, or moving them to the back of the privacy of the ambulance. And there's been many times that I actually made that wrong decision and moved that patient that I didn't think anything was going on, and actually had that patient deteriorate on me to the point that I had a couple deaths. So I thought that there would be a better way of picking up those electrical signals off the body without having to expose patients.
And that's just from the time of moving them. You didn't get the diagnosis done quickly enough because you were worried about things like privacy and modesty.
Right.
and it okay.
Yeah, just moving them up from even a seated position to a standing position can put enough stress on that heart to cause the patient to flatline. As you can see in the pictures, these sticky pads, even in adults on the lower left picture, cause chemical and skin reactions that are very annoying and painful. As you can imagine, the picture on the upper left, it's kind of graphic, but I wanted to add this in just to show the severity of the problem. And this is a premature baby. These sticky pads tear the skin on these infants, causing infection and sepsis and death within the hospitals. In the first 14 days of life, these premature babies are in an incubator that's 90% humidity. And just like I was saying with the heart attack patients where they're all sweaty and the sticky pads fall off, the same thing happens for monitoring these premature babies. So there's a big problem right now that we've identified in this field, but this is just the electrodes themselves. So I want to talk about the lead wires as well. So in a study that we've identified, I think it was a nursing association, 77% of these wires that were cleaned still had harmful antibiotic resistant bacteria on them. And another separate study concluded that the disposable versus reusable electrodes, so some of these electrodes you actually use one time, or some of these lead wires you use one time and then you can throw them out. And then some of them are reusable. Well, they did a study, I think it was by Cardinal Health, that when they switched from using reusable wires to disposable wires, the reduction in surgical site infections was reduced by 25%. So these wires are definitely causing hospital-acquired infections within the hospital. One solution is disposables, but then you have costly lead wires. So at one hospital, you have about $260,000 worth of lead wires being used per hospital per year. And the total amount of ECGs performed in the US in the hospitals every year is about 300 million. So it's a big cost. Again, it takes a lot of time to apply these ECGs. So you can see on the upper left-hand corner, these are the wires where they have at the end of them, these snaps. And that's what you have to attach the electrode to the end of those. Then you have to peel off a sticker and then attach it. And if it falls off, you have to redo that again. The wires go back to a monitor that you can see on the right. There's different monitors for EMS that are portable, but they still have the wires going to the patient. And on the ambulance, we have to actually jump over the wires to intubate a patient. And there's been many times where I did that and tripped over the wires, ripped all the wires off as I was trying to get to the head of the patient to intubate that patient. So I saw a big need for some type of innovation in this area of ECG monitoring. And this is really what sparked my passion for solving these problems.
In that picture you've got down there on the bottom left, I think most people who haven't been exposed to ECG or EKG look at that and they go, wait, how many electrodes and how do you know where to place them? Tell us a little bit about why the number and why the placement. This is a bit of a mystery, I think, to most people who haven't been exposed to it.
Sure. So normally in an EMS application, when we show up on scene, we would do a 3-lead ECG, which is actually 4 stickers placed on the upper mid-clavicular line on the chest, left and right, and then also on the stomach, left and right. And what we do it's called 3-lead ECG, which gives you a different vectors of the heart. So you can look at different areas of the heart and actually see what the health of the heart is at different vectors. When we see say for instance, a raise in the ST segment of the waveform in lead 2 view, then we suspect this person could be having a heart attack. And so what we do then is we take more of those electrodes out, snap them to the wires, and then we place them precordial leads, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner, which is 6 electrodes that go right across the chest like you see. And that gives us a more full view of what's going on with the heart that can actually diagnose heart attacks. And so that's kind of how the operation works. But this is basically taking vector views of the electrical activity of the heart. And just so everyone knows, the electricity in the heart is what causes your heart to beat. So it's a very important, very accurate, vital sign that we have to identify so that we can provide the correct treatment. So at BioSense, we invented the world's first non-contact EKG sensor. As you can see, in the upper left-hand corner, you can see 3 of these electrodes. What we do is we embed these into the mattress cover, and it can read through the mattress cover, bed sheets, and clothing. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, this is actually a snapshot from a video we took where someone got into bed and we were able to see a clear EKG signal within 10 seconds of them lying down. We can read through multiple layers of clothing. There's no pain. It's reusable because we're not coming in direct contact with the patient. We can embed this into mattresses. We can embed this into seats. We can embed this into chairs, in incubators for premature baby monitoring. So we completely eliminate the wires. We completely eliminate the electrodes using this type of technology. So just to talk real quick, we have a great team that has helped us get to this point. Dr. Steinhubel is one of the leading cardiologists in the country. He's been a great medical advisor to us. Our technical team includes Ali Riza Mogadam. He's has a lot of experience building brain to machine interfaces and biosensor designs. I know my dad's listening, so I'll give him a shout out as well, as a great advisor as well. So our beachhead market, as you know, everyone's probably wondering that there's so many applications for this technology. You know, where are you spending your focus? Our beachhead is going to be in the neonatal intensive care unit. We've had hospitals all over the country reach out to us saying, we need your technology here. It's hurting children. It's going to improve the care of these babies. I mean, 100% of these neonatal babies require 24-hour ECG monitoring. So these electrodes are literally on them all day, all the time. And they're messing with the skin. They're messing with the nurses that have to reapply them. Babies have to be washed every couple of days, so they have to take the electrodes off and put them back on. And then the NICUs are also adopting what's called family integrated care. And so they really want to have the babies and the parents interacting more often. So it's actually been proven that when parents are holding the baby, it reduces the NICU stay for that infant. And so eliminating the electrodes and the wires will allow parents to hold their baby more intimately and improve the family integrated care. So this is our target beachhead market, and from there we'll be entering into other markets. But for our starting point is to embed these sensors into the incubator and have our signal communicate with the existing hospital monitors today. So right now we're IRB approved at a major research hospital in Chicago for the NICU. We're going to begin our clinical trial in the third quarter of this year. We'll submit to our FDA in the first quarter of 2021 and hopefully get approval by the third quarter in 2021. So after the hospital, there's a ton of applications that even the hospital has directed us towards. So we want to knock one out of the park by going into the NICU. But after that, the hospitals want to take this into the pediatric ICU for monitoring pediatric babies that are a little bit older, but still have the same problems. And then delivery, right after a baby is born, the most important thing is understanding, what their heart rate and vitals are, seconds after they're born. So this would be a very easy way of just placing a baby in a bassinet and boom, right away you get an EKG. Because obviously the babies, when they're born, they're full of fluids, so the sticky pads don't stick, and it makes it very difficult. And getting an accurate heart rate on them is important. Burn units obviously is a big concern with skin. Having your torso burned completely actually constricts the skin around your body and makes it harder for you to breathe and can cause cardiac issues. So monitoring the heart in burn units is important, and using a non-contact EKG will allow us to do that pain-free for these patients. And after that, adult monitoring is obviously an application. We've had this tested on adults and infants. It works on both of them. And then outside the hospital, I mean, there's a lot of crazy applications that have come across our desks, including, animal monitoring. We've actually had our system working in surgery for a dog that had about 2-inch thick hair. So they didn't have to shave the dog. There's a lot of applications with horses and other animals as well. Putting this into your bed, your furniture, your office chair, without having to put anything on like a wearable. You don't have to think about it. You just go about your everyday life. Putting this into vehicles, driving to work every day, without having to think about it. You still drive to work and drive home, and getting that EKG data on you daily, we can start to do a lot of cool predictive analytics before you even show signs or symptoms of illness. Military applications, everyone can think of that, and remote monitoring. So that's my presentation today. Gene, do you have any other questions? And I'm really thankful for you letting me share this with you guys.
I think it's really interesting because I think so many of us, we don't really understand EKG, and we sort of take it for granted. It's a tool out there, but it's a very important tool, and it's one that's got a lot of inherent strengths and a lot of inherent drawbacks as well. We did have a question from Francis Glory. He said, why are you embedding into other devices as opposed to having your own full solution, like a pad, for instance? And before you answer that, I just want to tell the audience, please feel free to either type into the chat or the Q&A or raise your hand if you'd like to ask Tom a question about EKG or about BioSense. Feel free to raise a hand there. But to Francis's question, why the strategy to embed rather than to go a standalone solution?
No, that's a great question. And actually, I probably didn't do a great job explaining that. And so I'm glad you brought this question up. We are actually, it's going to be like a top pad that goes on top of the mattress. So that's exactly where our head's at. We can embed it into stuff, but it doesn't make as much sense as getting like a top pad like you suggested. So that is our strategy for the NICU, is putting our own pad on top of the mattress pad.
That's great. Again, feel free to raise your hand if you got a question for Tom. Tom, what, in terms of the percentage of patients that see the harm come from the pads themselves, from the electrodes themselves, would you care to take a stab at what percentage of patients have adverse reactions to those pads that you've seen?
It all depends on how long you're monitoring these patients too. For me in the EMS world, we would see patients maybe for 30 minutes to an hour tops. So I was more enlightened by the NICU conversations when these pads are on these patients for days and even weeks. They're seeing a lot more issues there than I saw from just the 30 minutes that I was working on them. And I would leave the pads on them when I would transport to the hospital, and just the hospital would use those same electrodes. But there's I don't know if you've ever worn these, but I put them on myself, and after like an hour, if I take it off, I have a red circle there for about 2 to 3 days. There's chemical reactions, there's allergic reactions that can happen. So I don't have an exact percentage, I should say, but it does happen very often.
That's great. It's also, just for those in our audience who have listened to us talk about 10-9-3 biocompatibility testing in the past, and how that is based, among other things, on what tissue type you're exposing the device to, as well as the duration. You just heard it here live. That's one of the key factors in how your skin is going to react to it. Oh, that's great, Tom. Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions here, but if folks are interested in getting in touch with you, Tom, how could they do that?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do have one question here, but go ahead and answer that question, then we'll go to Ken Spencer.
Yeah, so if you visit our site, it's thebiosense.tech, TheBioSense.tech, or you can email me at tom@thebiosense.tech.
Great. That's awesome. One question here from Ken Spencer.
Yeah, so Tom, thanks. I have just a couple of questions. I noticed on the slide it says EZG Holding Company confidential and proprietary. So does that mean we can't share any of these slides?
That is a watermark I put on all my slide decks. Right. This is a non-confidential deck, so feel free to share it.
Okay, and Tom, I remember EZG coming to visit us at MCIRC at U of M, maybe very early on. So you certainly evolved.
Yeah, we certainly have. It's been 9 years of sweat and tears to get to this point. I've learned a lot along the way. I'm a first-time entrepreneur, so you learn a lot from your mistakes. But we did start the company off with the name EZG, and then soon learned that was a very confusing name to have for an ECG company, which at first I thought would be kind of creative and cool, and then later is kind of more of a pain in the but so.
I finally just got it about 30 seconds ago, so thank you.
Yeah, and one other thing, Tom, I noticed, so your future plans and looking at the military there, are you familiar with the company ADS Incorporated? Alpha Delta Sierra Incorporated?
I'm not, nope.
So just to pass along, you might want to look them up. They're over a $3 billion company. They are one of the largest suppliers of products to the military. They're all GAO approved and things, and we use them for some of our development stuff. So you might want to look at them, and the contacts there are excellent.
Awesome. I will definitely do that. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Wonderful. Hey, I love making those connections. It's really awesome. Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Tom, for being with us today. We really appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again. Oh, it's very exciting. It's neat to see innovation like that. As he was talking about tripping over ECG leads, I can only imagine. Not a good time. Okay, if we can get this to come up here, we are going to do a little bit of FDA education. Registration, listing, clearance, granting, authorization, approval. Oh my. Now, a few weeks ago, you may remember we were going to do a shorter version of this that was going to focus on clearance and approval because those are the most commonly misunderstood terms. I got a phone call out of the blue from a health and fitness host at a major TV station, national TV station, and we got into a deep conversation, and he made me realize that it's actually all of these terms that people are having a hard time understanding. And so we decided we would expand this a little bit to talk about each of these terms and what they mean and what they imply about your product development effort, because there are so many misconceptions about this, and then people start walking down the wrong path, sometimes for years, assuming one thing and realizing by a basic switch of terminology that they're heading down the wrong path. So what's the difference? Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that registration really has to do with the company, not the product. Listing, clearance, granting, authorization, and approval really have to do with the product itself, with the medical device. So with that in mind, let's talk briefly about registration. FDA says that owners and operators of places of business, those are establishments or facilities, that are involved in the production and distribution of medical devices intended for use in the United States are required to register annually with the FDA. This process is known as establishment registration, and that's going to set you back about $5,000 a year, $5,500 a year. Okay, that's registration. Let's talk about listing. Most establishments, and again, this is from FDA, that are required to register with FDA are also required to list the devices that are made there and the activities that are performed on those devices. Makes sense, right? We want to know that you exist, and we want to know what you're doing and what devices you're doing it on. Well, that all makes sense up to that point. Here's the big question. Hope you're listening. Do registration and listing communicate FDA blessing, oversight, or scrutiny? And the answer, of course, is a big, fat no. None of the above. But the reality is we hear every day companies claiming out there that because they're FDA registered or listed, that somehow they're FDA blessed. I want to show you an example found on a major national retailer that shall not be named by a company that shall not be named. But here they're selling a cervical neck traction device, and they claim that it's FDA registered. Wow, that gives you a feeling of confidence, doesn't it? Well, it shouldn't. And it's going to give you instant pain relief. Well, that's a claim that maybe or not is one we should be making. And really what these folks should be saying is that this is an FDA listed product. Well, but even that's not true, because I looked under the company name, under the product name and was not able to find that they are either registered or listed. But of course, that's put there as a marketing attempt to make people feel good about their product, as though FDA has looked at it. That's what you carry away, isn't it? But it's not true, because registration and listing communicate no FDA oversight, approval, blessing, or even clearance, as we'll talk about later. So I want you to use this out in your life as you're looking at products. Number one, registration and listing don't mean any kind of blessing. Number two, anyone can get them by sending FDA about $5,000. So keep that in mind. Now, let's get on to another two categories. And that really is the difference between opening a gate, which you see on the left there, and really blessing a product, saying, this is good, we've reviewed this and we're okay with it. We're really okay with it. On the left, you have what is traditionally known as clearance, or the 510K process. 510K cleared devices are allowed to go to the market by the agency. They're not particularly blessed. They're not under as high scrutiny as PMA devices. PMA stands for pre-market approval. And those are the only devices, those class 3 devices, are really the only ones that you can truly say are approved by the agency, that actually communicates any level of blessing by the agency. So how do you know which of these it is and which applies and what's really going on under the hood? Well, what I want to show you here is the layers of control that FDA applies. The first layer is what's called general controls, and this applies to most medical devices in the United States. The next layer after that is called special controls, and this applies to many. After that, we have things like the de novo request process and the pre-market approval process for things that need even more scrutiny than the above supply. So let's talk about general controls. These are the sections under general controls in the regulations. They cover things like adulterated devices, misbranded devices, the registration and listing that we talked about earlier, banned devices, notifications and other remedies, things that might have to be said, records and reports that need to be maintained for devices, and general provisions respecting control of devices intended for human use. And in a perfect world with devices that weren't really that risky, this would be all you need to ensure that the devices are reasonable for sale. We've got ways to make notifications. We've got ways to maintain reports. We've got ways to register the people who are making the devices. We've got certain types of devices that we can't approve, and we've banned them in general. We've got questions about misbranding. It would be great if we could manage everything only through these controls, but that's not true in every case. These are general controls. Next up is special controls. So for certain types of devices, there's more that needs to be done. There are performance standards, or maybe a requirement for post-market surveillance. You got your clearance to the market, but FDA would like you to watch how that device operates once it's on the market. They'd like to watch it with you. Maybe patient registries are required. Maybe we need to know not just that the device is cleared to the market, but we need to know who's been using it so that if anything goes wrong, we can contact them. Maybe there are special labeling requirements. Maybe there's pre-market data requirements that go beyond what's in general controls. Maybe there are other guidelines that the agency has established that need to be followed. These all fall into the layer that's known as special controls. Now, what if general and special controls are enough to ensure the safety and efficacy of the device, but there is no predicate device to base a 510K off of? Most people, I think, understand that 510Ks require a predicate device, a legally marketed device that you can compare yourself to. In comes the de novo request, which a few years ago, FDA made a primary pathway that you can access without first getting rejected for a 510K. If general and special controls that we just reviewed are sufficient, but no predicate device is available, well, originally what was supposed to happen was that was supposed to be called a class 3 device and kicked into the PMA pathway. But the PMA pathway is so burdensome that it was really leaving out a lot of room for innovation. So the de novo pathway provides an intermediate between the 510K process and the PMA process. And if you successfully get through a de novo, you can use that device as a predicate for a future 510K clearance. So it's a neat pathway. Just for completeness, the pre-market approval, Class 3 devices are those that support or sustain human life, are of substantial importance in preventing impairment of human health, or which present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury. And general and special controls alone are insufficient to assure safety and effectiveness. When you hear PMA, you usually hear clinical trial in the same word. A successful PMA contains sufficient valid scientific evidence to assure that the device is safe and effective for its intended use. Now, I'm a picture person, so I hate all these slides full of text. I want to show you this graph. Keep in mind that this is in general, so exceptions do exist. When you look at your device, the question comes up, are general controls sufficient in FDA's eyes? If the answer is yes, there's a good chance that all you have to do is register, list, and then comply with general controls. Good news. If general controls aren't sufficient, the answer is no, then the next question is, are general and special controls sufficient? If the answer is yes, then you're either headed towards a 510K with a predicate or the de novo process if there's no predicate. The term for 510K is cleared. The term for a de novo is granted. The de novo request becomes granted. If the answer is no to both general and special controls being sufficient, that's where you get into a PMA. And again, there are exceptions and there are times that this is not true, but in general, if you've wondered how the classes of devices relate to these general and special controls, generally, Class 1 devices are a matter of registering, listing, and then complying with general controls. Exceptions do exist. There are devices that are Class 1 that require 510Ks and GMP, but as a general rule, this is where Class 1 devices fall. Class 2 devices, as a general rule, fall over here, where general and special controls are sufficient, and you can get a 510K with a predicate. Class 3 devices are the classic PMA pre-market approval process. And that leaves us with the de novo devices kind of in between those two, which is why the pathway was created. There are many cases where maybe the Class 2 510K predicate-based process is not the most appropriate, but it's also not appropriate to consider these devices so novel and risky that they warrant a Class 3 PMA. And that's where you get into the de novo process. So in general, I hope this graphic helps you as you think about the process. But keep in mind, it depends. There are exceptions to each of these, and I don't want you to take it as absolute gospel. Why does this matter? Let's take two examples in particular, clearance versus approval, the classic 510K versus PMA. Many people believe that when they do a 510K, their primary goal is to go out there and show the safety and effectiveness of the device. But the 510K process is based on the concept of substantial equivalence. You have to demonstrate that your device is, first and foremost, substantially equivalent to a legally marketed predicate device. A lot of people miss that. We just ran into a company recently where they'd been going for a lot of time over a predicate that probably wasn't the most appropriate because they weren't paying attention to the concept of substantial equivalence. On the other hand, if you're going for a pre-market approval, it's all about safety and effectiveness. That's where the conversation starts and ends. You need to be aware of these distinctions and what that's going to mean for your development path. One more quick word on authorizations, because that's the one term we haven't talked about yet. But many of you are very familiar with this at this point in time because of the emergency use authorizations. Sure, they existed before COVID, but I don't think they ever got quite the workout they got as they did during COVID. These are temporary allowances with ongoing scrutiny. The most important word here is the word revocation. You can expect that the emergency use authorizations will eventually be revoked. Many have, many more will be. Sometimes they're revoked because the need is no longer there and the level of scrutiny doesn't rise to the level of scrutiny that we would usually put a device through. So either way, there is no expectation of permanence. Other times it becomes clear, as has happened with some of the antibody assays, that the product just didn't live up to its original promise. And while they were given quick permission to get on the market, the reality is that they weren't allowed to stay there. So I'm going to go back to this graphic in summary. Again, it's a general concept, but if you need a quick way to reference registration, listing, clearance, granting, and approval, it's a nice graphic. Keep in mind that devices that are cleared, granted, or approved still have to register and list. So it doesn't exempt you from those requirements. Almost every device has to register and list. But as we said today, it doesn't communicate any kind of blessing on the part of FDA. So please spread that message far and wide when people are seeing that, oh, this device is FDA registered, and they think that it means something. Well, sorry, it doesn't. That's what you need to know about all these terms, the word soup that we have, and the pathways that you can follow after that. I'll pause the share right there. And if anyone live with us today has any questions, I would welcome your questions on these terms or anything else we've talked about on MedTech Crossroads. You can just raise your hand. Ken, you're live.
Yeah, so can you hear me now, Gene?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, so this was just excellent. So is there a way that we can snip this presentation and use it for our entire MCERT community, U of M?
Absolutely, yeah. So we will send around next week, as we do with each of our episodes and each of our speakers. There will be a YouTube link specifically to this segment as well as others. And if you'd like to do that, you're more than welcome to. Absolutely.
Great.
It'll come around. I'll make sure to send it specifically to you, Ken.
Thank you.
Dante, you're live.
Good afternoon. Great presentation. I've got a question. I'm aware of the list-in items, and I know that they also have other lists for respirators and so forth. For respirators in particular, there's companies or products that have been delisted. I don't recall the schedule. I can pull it up if I look in my folder. I did download it, but how does that happen that they get delisted? And should that be a concern if they were previously approved under emergency use and then unapproved? What does that really mean when they do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Phenomenal question. So yes, we're talking specifically about emergency use authorizations at this point. And yes, they can be delisted. There's generally an appendix to the emergency use authorization that says these are the companies and the products that have been authorized under the EUA. We just a few weeks ago talked about an umbrella mask EUA that allows you to get on really easily if you're making surgical masks in that case. When they're delisted, they are no longer authorized for sale under that. The reason for the delisting could vary. In the case of many imported respirators that we saw, it was they had to make a blanket statement that they basically weren't going to trust the data of anything coming out of China. That was just one thing that got sort of blanket said. That doesn't necessarily mean that those masks were bad or weren't bad. There's really no way to say. It was really an administrative statement. What it really does mean is that you couldn't offer them for sale anymore. Where it gets a little murkier, and I don't pretend to be a lawyer and I don't even play one on TV, is whether an entity could still use those masks if they had purchased them. That's another question. Dante, does that start to get to the question that you had?
Yeah, it does. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So, like I said, I had downloaded a list. So, for those people that have the ones that are in the appendix, because it is an appendix item, does that mean that I just want to repeat, Does that mean that they're no longer authorized to be sold? They're no longer valid to be used if you own them? How good or bad are they? Are they legitimate, or that's a question, because I've seen people that have items that are in an appendix, and does that mean it's null and void? I guess in that question, how much risk is there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I couldn't offer any legal advice on that. And I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards, and we can see if we can find specific ones and the specific language in the EUA that refers to it. What I do know is if they're off the list, they're not legitimate to be sold anymore, because that's what the emergency use authorization is about. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it necessarily means that they are technically bad. They may or they may not be, but that's generally not what the EUA is strictly about. Now, if we go away from masks for a minute, you remember the antibody tests that we've been talking about recently.
Right.
Those were pulled because they weren't living up to the percentage claims that they had gone to market with. So that was a statement of this isn't working, but many EUAs can be very procedural. And so I wouldn't tell you to read in one way or the other based on that.
Outstanding. Thanks, Gene.
Yeah, thank you, Dante. Great question. Phenomenal
Thank you for doing
question.
what you're doing too.
Oh, thanks for being here. We appreciate your participation. Our friend Olaf, you're live.
Yeah, hi, Gene. Very good slides. Maybe you can sell those to the FDA so you can put that on their website also.
I got a lot of it from their website, just to give credit where credit is due. But
after that one slide in the end where you summarize that, actually, the very first question is like, I heard you then summarize at the end that once you go through, the class 2, how do I say, process, or the class 3 process to get a clearance or an approval, you then still have to get the registration and listing in addition to that.
Yes. Now, to use the word "get" is almost a misnomer, in the sense that one of the main points we're making here is that registration and listing are really just a bureaucratic and fee-based thing.
Yeah.
I can go out there, start a company, tell the FDA I'm selling like a class 1 product that wouldn't need a 510K anyways, pay them $5,000, and I'm registered and listed for that. Whether they ever get around to auditing me or not is a question. They can at that point, but have they? No. So it could totally be vaporware, and I could still have a registration and listing. And the step of doing the registration and listing, once you have a cleared 510K, for example, it's just a matter of sending FDA notification and paying the fee.
Okay, which then brings me to the point of basically, being a good citizen, or in the interest of other companies that have gone through this process with due diligence. So, like in your case with this, what was it, a neck pillow or something, where there was no evidence that they actually were either registered or even listed, leave alone going through any of the other things. Would they pay a fine if somebody like mentions them or lists them to the FDA? And shouldn't we be, as good citizens, wouldn't it be advised to then tell Amazon or wherever that is that they're actually lying? Because it harms other companies that go through this process of paying the $5,000, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I guess
it's a great question, and I'll stay away from too much opinion of my own here, but you're right. Now, let me tell you 2 of the challenges, and I think this is a great thing for us to be talking about as a community. One of the challenges is with internet sales, you've seen some of the names that get put on the companies. They seem to be these amalgams of letters and sometimes English words. There's nothing that prevents that entity, whatever it may be, from simply pulling itself as an entity, reforming, and then coming right back to the market. We are very based on a per company kind of administrative approach in the US. And so the challenge there is you'd burn up a lot of time and a lot of money going through those. Now, if they are hurting people and that can be shown, that's going to bring scrutiny. But if the agency had to chase down every last company out there on the web, it would quickly burn through resources it doesn't have. That's one of the challenges. I'll tell you one other challenge that we've seen personally on a couple of occasions is companies, even US-based companies, misclassifying themselves as class 1. Another company in good faith wants to get in on that market and has a competitive product. And they suddenly realize that their competitor has misclassified themselves as so as to exempt themselves from scrutiny. So now if they're honest about it, they're going to go through usually what comes as a class 2 process with a 510K. And there is no good way to compete because they've basically been stuck out of the market because they would have to go through this very expensive, very rigorous process. Their competitor hasn't gone through that process. And the competitor's just relying on the fact that FDA probably doesn't have the resources to track down every little class 1 company out there that may be misclassifying themselves. So the problem actually goes deeper if you start looking at it. I don't want to necessarily suggest any solutions or should-dos at this point, but I think it is a phenomenal question you asked and something that we would do well to think about as a community because we've already seen small companies hurt by those kinds of deceptions.
I guess one way we could do is to, as a reviewer then possible on Amazon or even on the company's website, leave a comment as like, well, I checked and they're actually not registered or something like that, which is, maybe the FDA doesn't have the resource to check that, but at least it might make the company more honest or lets other potential customers at least get to the truth. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting idea you got there. We may have to follow up on that one. Appreciate your comments, Olaf, as always.
Sure. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you. Patrick Powell, you're live. Just unmute.
Oh, sorry, I just joined. That was a mistake, but how you doing?
Doing well. It's good to hear your voice. Did you have a question?
I did not. I just accidentally hit it, so I'll jump
Okay,
off.
well, we're glad to have you on the show. I'll give another 30 seconds for any more questions or comments, as well as check-ins. As always, you're welcome to just pop on for 30 seconds and tell us what your entity is doing, especially if it's something of public interest. We would love to hear about it. And again, another 30 seconds, just raise a hand if you've got it. Well, it's almost hard to believe that we've been to almost a quarter century of these shows. 23rd episode of MedTech Crossroads. We are so thankful for each one of you being here today, for the conversations, for the chance for the community to connect with each other. It's always such a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. We've got a great show next week. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great one. Bye-bye.